Hello and welcome back to Conquering My Collection. This is the second in 4 videos covering the Criterion Collection release of Abbas Kiarostami's Coca trilogy, and in this video we're going to be talking about the second film in that trilogy from 1992, And Life Goes On. Now, I prefer the literal translation of the film's title, which is Life and Nothing More, but Criterion have gone with And Life Goes On, so we'll try that on for size. Even though I would say And Life Goes On is has a bit more of a punch to it, I suppose, which is maybe why they went with it. I'm not entirely sure. And it is a line of dialogue spoken in the film, but I just like Life and Nothing More. It's a really nice title. But anyway, so following on from the first film, which is about a young boy trying to take his friend's homework book back to him, and he doesn't know where his friend lives, so he goes over to the next village, and it's this kind of big odyssey of a young boy in a very big kind of, world of adults, and, going through the countryside and all that kind of stuff. Very simple story, has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and is a nicely enclosed film. And Life Goes On is about the director of Where's the Friend's House, driving back to Coca, where he filmed the first film in the trilogy, to see if the two young boys from the movie, the first movie, are still alive after a real-life earthquake hit the area of Coca in 1990, I believe, and killed some 50,000 people. And the director wants to go and see if those boys are all right, and see the area where he made that film a few years ago. Now, the director is obviously Abbas Kiarostami, but the director in And Life Goes On is played by an actor. It's not meant to be Kiarostami, even though it kind of is, and it's modeled on the true story. When Kiarostami heard about what happened in Coca, he drove there the next day with his son in the car to see, if he could find the two young boys. He told that story at a German film festival appearance, I believe, and someone said to him, "You should make that a film." And so he did, and thus was born the second film in the trilogy that was never really intended to be a trilogy or a continuation of the first film. And so we open the film at a toll booth, and this white-haired man drives up and says to the kind of the attendant, is the kind of the border, or not the border, but there's like a what do you call it? Well, he's already at the toll bridge, or not even the toll bridge. What am I talking about? The toll bridge. So the film opens with a white-haired man, and he says to the attendant, is the road open ahead? And he wants to know if he can get through to Coca, and he had apparently tried the day before. And he's off in the car, and he has his young son with him in the back called Puya, and it's a road movie from then on out. And it's pretty much from the opening scene of the film to the last, we're in the car, and then there are diversions and kind of little expeditions in between, but we open the film with him in the car, we end the film with him in the car. I never thought about that until I just sat down to do the review, which is interesting, but the film is also entirely on location. I don't think there's any interior scenes shot in the film. People go inside buildings, but I don't think the camera ever goes inside a building, and I think similarly the third film is the same. But it's this journey, and kind of, I would say, not all three of the films are journey movies. The third film was a personal journey movie, but the first two are quest movies in a sense. And the first one's a very fictional quest. The second one is a fictional quest based on a real life quest. And so we follow the director and the one thing I'll say about the film is that when I first watched it, I thought that this is a fan of the film who's taken his son to go and see what happened to the two young boys from that film he really liked, made by Kiarostami. Because number one, Kiarostami wasn't playing himself, and I kind of figured that he would if this was about the true story. It feels like something he'd do. At the same time, it feels very much like something he wouldn't do. So I kind of understand both sides of that, that particular topic as far as whether he should or shouldn't have been playing the part of himself in the movie. But so there's that element, but I didn't understand that because the film opens, and you kind of get the gist. They go into Coca. There's been an earthquake, and I knew about the real earthquake from watching the third film, but I wasn't aware that he was meant to be the director of the film, and I can't remember if there's any point really that it's said out loud. But there is a moment where he picks up someone who was in the first movie, and the way that they're talking feels like they work together. So that kind of, I guess, hints it without holding a hand at all. But I'd read, halfway through watching the film that he was supposed to be the director. I was like, oh, that's interesting. But that wasn't really readily obvious to me as I was watching the film. So maybe that's a detractor, I don't know. But I love how, the film starts with them driving to Coca. Someone says in one of the interviews on the discs that, that a normal film would have probably opened with, him hearing about it on the radio, when you get the setup of him leaving. We just start with him already on the road with his son. And it says, I love the first 20-30 minutes where they're just on their way. And there's these wonderful little side moments where the son has to get out and pee, and there's some fun visual humor there, but also just seeing the landscapes and the little random conversations the son has with his father. And what was interesting about the behind the scenes is that the actor who plays the director is, much like the other three films, is not an actual professional actor. He was just someone Kiarostami met and said, you should be in the film. We're doing it in a few months or whatever. And okay, I'll do that. And then it got close to the time of making it, and he realized that this guy didn't know how to drive, and the whole movie is him driving. So he kind of took a crash course in driving, but in the film you can see him looking very nervous and hesitant behind the wheel. And Kiarostami said, I think this works out perfectly because it looks like he's full of concern for the two young boys, and it's kind of true. That's what I read into it. And I actually thought he was a really good actor, but he was, you can debate whether or not it was really acting. And that's just a whole interesting other side point about when directors work with non-actors. Do you credit the actor, or do you credit the director who's really molding the performance more than he would with, say, a professional actor, perhaps? And every case is different, obviously, but I thought the guy gave a great performance. I think he's so memorable in the film in the way that he's so understated. And maybe that's just, he's just playing himself, and Kiarostami's just tweaking it a little bit. I love the young boy. He's very fresh-faced and cute, and reminded me of like someone I would have been friends with when I was a kid, and his kind of outlook on stuff. And there's a really nice scene when the son wanders off once they get to the villages, and he just kind of meets this woman washing her dishes and stuff, and they have a little conversation, and it's so, again, authentic because the kid is like playing around with stuff as he's talking to her. It feels like a conversation that would happen between a young kid and an adult, And I particularly loved that section of the film when they finally get closer to Coca, and the father gets out of the car, and they just wander around to just start talking to people, and these little conversations happen, and he meets these people, and he just sits there and he's looking around, and there's some beautiful shots. The cinematography in this film is fantastic, and there's one particular image of it's like the top of a house, and there's kind of like a balcony and like an opening. And beyond the opening is like this beautiful field, and the camera like zooms in. It's just a fantastic, visual. And there's some really great kind of visual moments, and you just see these little side streets, and, just people who are getting on with their life, people who are distraught about the earthquake, people who are very matter-of-fact about the earthquake. And a lot of this is obviously recreated stuff, and there are moments where a character will get into the car with the father and the son, and the camera will be placed looking at the passenger seat. And you'll see the character interacting with the director. But apparently what's happening there is Kiarostami is actually driving the car and asking the questions. And so he's kind of driving a lot of this stuff. And so in a lot of cases, maybe there isn't an actual interaction between the two actors, but Kiarostami is kind of, in the shadows, so to speak, kind of orchestrating certain things. And in the commentary, the two, I'm not sure what you call it, if they're critics or not, or experts on Kiarostami. Yeah, they both wrote a book about Kiarostami, authors we'll call them. They talk about how, they don't know everything as far as like what that shot was and what was going on there, but they're pretty sure that, that is probably a shot where Kiarostami is off camera acting along with the people in the film, as opposed to the man who plays the father and the director. So that's kind of interesting, and you can see these genuine reactions coming out of them. And when you do hear Kiarostami in documentaries and things like that, you can see the kind of, and especially in Homework, the documentary on the first disc, and the questions he's asking these kids, and this is like a real documentary. I love how he questions people. He'll ask them a question, and they'll say something, but they don't fully answer it. And normal people just skirt over that, but he'll repeat it again, but in a way that it doesn't feel like it's kind of browbeating them. It doesn't feel like it's kind of judging them for not answering the question or anything. It's just like, well, you just said this, but you also said that. So how does that kind of add up? That kind of thing. he had a very keen way of talking to people, I think, and that probably, you know, made a lot of those scenes in the film where it is just a camera on a person looking at someone off screen, and it's probably Kiarostami really driving the conversation forward. And there are points where, you know, the car pulls up and the father speaks to, you know, people on the road, and that feels almost like it was shot for real, and perhaps it was. You know, you don't really know, but I have read and heard in some of the special features that Kiarostami did recreate a lot of this stuff when they're driving to Coca, and there's almost for a good portion of the film, there's this constant drone of helicopters overhead, which really puts you in the feeling of this kind of state of emergency almost, and that kind of also gives you a different feeling of the journey that this man is taking, because, you know, he's going to this place where it's I wouldn't say it's dangerous necessarily, but a lot of, you know, it's a natural disaster. There's one point where they're driving up this huge mountainside hill, and there's these big huge cracks through the road and down through the side of this mountain, which have been caused by the earthquake, and, you know, it's, you know, he can't go any further than that in the car. And there are many opportunities where, you know, any normal person probably would have just turned around and said, okay, it's not worth it, but he keeps going. And that very much speaks to the quest and the journey of the young boy in the first film. It's kind of mirroring each other in that sense, where he just has to complete his mission, he has to keep going. And that kind of goes right through to the very end of the film. But I love the little moments when they just kind of, it's just these little interstitials almost. There's a particular shot where the young boy is kind of lying back, like, one of if he's actually got his hands behind his head, Boyhood style, but he's leaning back and looking through the car window, and you see these mountains passing, and there's, you know, these kind of electricity lines and stuff, and that just it took me right back to being a kid, and just window gazing out of the window while going on trips with my dad in the camper van and stuff, and driving through the south of France and seeing different parts of the world through a window. It took me right back to that. And I just love those little moments, and I think a lot of people would probably find a film like this quite boring, but I just, it was just really interesting. There are moments where you see characters through the window and you don't really see all of them, but a little exchange happens. There's a bit where he buys a warm bottle of Coke from a kind of a vendor that's been smashed, and he leaves some money there and takes the warm bottle of Coke. He drinks some of it, and then he's done with this, he's going to throw it away, and then suddenly there's a van next to them, and the woman says, "Don't throw that away, give me some of that for the baby." And you just see a hand come down and pick it up. There's a bit where the father gets out of the car and he walks through these trees, and there's a baby crying on a hammock in the middle of nowhere. And he just goes over and he just looks at the baby and waves at him, and the baby kind of waves back, and then the mother turns up, and that's it. There's no real narrative function of that other than just speaking to the kind of message of the film, which is life goes on, you know, life and nothing more. What is life? It's these little moments, you know, and these big things happen, and horrible things do happen, but no matter what happens, life does go on, and the world keeps spinning, you know, and so you get this outlook on life throughout the film, where, you know, he's going forward, he wants to find these two boys, and there's roadblocks, and, you know, people telling him that you can't go that way. He's like, well, I'll find another way. Like, he's so persistent, and like halfway through the film, he begins to kind of settle down and just take his time and just look at what he is driving through and speak to the people he has kind of, you know, met along the way, and he becomes a lot more relaxed. As not that he's like, you know, tightly wound up in the beginning, but he does look kind of concerned through the ways that I've told you about in terms of him not being a very confident driver. But, you know, as far as the film is concerned, he's very concerned about these two boys, and roadblocks aren't going to stop him. He's going to get through somehow, but he begins to soften throughout the film, and there's all these interactions with these different people, and little twists and turns, and lots of moments where the car is kind of winding around a long path in a mountain, and you hear the dialogue as if they're sat right next to you. And so that's something he employed, I think, in the third film, and also hugely in Taste of Cherry, which is another wonderful film. But there's a weird effect when you see a car at a distance, but you hear the dialogue as if they're right there in front of you on the camera in close-up. And so you get this kind of weird, not even bird's eye view, but kind of a very distant view of what's going on in terms of the car, but a very close perception of what's being said, which is an interesting way of just playing around with the form of films, I think. And I really liked the section near the end when they get to the kind of camp where people are setting up and trying to get the World Cup going. And there's like there's this camp, and off in the distance is beautifully framed. You see a guy halfway up the hill, and he's relaying the shouting from the camp up to the guy on the very top of the hill with the big antenna, trying to move it so they can get a picture for the World Cup match. And the young boy stays, and the father continues the journey, goes up to the top, and stops to speak to the guy with the antenna. And it's one maybe criticism I have, is that this particular man, and there's a little bit of it earlier on in the film. I mean, there's this one woman who's completely distraught. She's like, "We've lost everything," and that feels legitimate to what had actually happened, and the houses that were lost, the lives that were lost. But there's these two young girls, and they've gone through some loss with the earthquake, but they're kind of like smiling and laughing a little bit, or kind of trying not to smile. And it makes me wonder if like that was just, the director speaking to them, and they're kind of getting a bit coy and shy, and they're not really into the moment of feeling that a big devastating earthquake has just happened in reality, because they filmed it, after the actual event itself. And I was like, well, I guess some kids, even though they've been through some stuff, would probably still smirk at an adult asking them these questions. Not that they were, silly questions or anything, but a stranger comes up to you and starts asking questions, and I can see how kids, even if they've been through something bad, would kind of find something strangely amusing in that. And maybe that's kind of a defense mechanism to not feel so shit about what has been happening. But when he gets to the top of the hill, there's a guy with the antenna, and he's just got this smile on his face. He's like, "You in mourning?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm in mourning. I lost my sister," and he's just like all these family members who just died like the 2 days before. And he's like, "Well, life goes on." He's got the smile on his face. The World Cup's on. We got to keep going. And it just felt a bit disingenuous. And it's one of those things where I would like to know if Kiarostami really encountered people like that, who were still chipper despite what had happened, and people that they'd lost. Because if that's true, that's remarkable. But I just don't buy that kind of reaction. But I enjoy the message of life goes on. It's almost like it feels like a security blanket almost of, because at one point, and many points perhaps in our lives, we're going to go through loss and extreme emotions in the negative. And, you always worry about when the next one's going to be, or when the first one's going to be, and someone that you love dies, and how are you going to deal with that, and will you ever be able to deal with that hypothetical situation that will probably be a reality at some point in your life. And it's almost a nice thing to think that maybe I will still be able to feel like, well, life goes on and the World Cup's on, Not that I have any interest in football whatsoever, and currently as I film this, the Euros are on, and I just could not care less. But, the thought of it, that we got to keep going, and what's here is what's here, and that just makes you think of a whole bigger idea, which is the climate change. Not that this film has anything to do with climate change whatsoever, but in a sense, it's like nature is kind of is kind of fighting back in a way. But with an earthquake, it's completely different. With global warming, it's entirely that's our fault. That's us doing that. And it reminds you of something Richard Attenborough said in one of his documentaries, which is that it isn't a case of we're destroying the planet, it's we're destroying ourselves. The planet's going to keep going after we're long dead and gone, and humanity just kills itself through the way that we're treating the planet. The planet will adapt and will keep going, but as far as sustaining human life, maybe not so much. But anyways, that's a whole other point. But the central idea of life goes on, and finding the joy in these little moments and things. And yeah, I like that element of the film. My voice is going for some reason. I'm not getting choked up, I promise. So yeah, I really loved this film. It was just it wasn't what I expected. And one thing I can say that's really great about the Coca trilogy is that all three of them feel linked by a thread in a really interesting way. Obviously, there's the same locations, same people pop up, and they're kind of cameos from people who appeared in the first film and the second and third film. Sometimes it's a bigger role, sometimes it's a smaller role and throwaway kind of thing, an Easter egg of sorts. But what I really like is that all three of them feel very different at the same time. Again, the first two are kind of quest movies, but they're very different quests, and there's different flavors because the first one is this isolated experience. The second one is kind of breaking the wall a little bit in terms of we're following the director of the first film, but he's not really the director, he's an actor, and then he's not really even an actor, And of course, we meet the young character of Hossein in this film, who becomes the lead character of the third film. We'll talk about that in the next video. And yeah, and the ending. I really was frustrated by the ending because I kept looking at the clock. Well, not the clock, but the runtime on the PS4, and I was like, I don't think we're going to get to those two boys. It's going to be one of those frustrating things where he's been looking for these two boys and I wanted to see them. I wanted to see what they looked like because this was made like 5 years after the first film. I wanted to see what the two boys look like now. And what was interesting is that the two friends in the first film, whereas the friend's house, were actual brothers in real life. So I wanted to see what these brothers, what they looked like. I assumed in making the film about the search for them that they hadn't, perished, and I think I'd read somewhere that they appeared again in the trilogy. But the way that the film ended was very frustrating for me. But the more I sat on it, the more I liked it and appreciated it. And it can be tricky sometimes when you do kind of think how much time is left and you start to stress out about a certain thing happening in the film. That's the beauty of going to the cinema. You can't do that kind of clock watching. You have to sit there and watch it and experience it. And you don't know when it's going to end. Especially in a film like this where it could end feasibly at almost any point because it's not a traditional film in terms of how it structures itself and the normal conventions you find in American films, for example. But, that kind of took away from the experience because I was kind of looking at the time and thinking, is there enough time for him to get to the two boys? And if there is, are we even going to get a scene with them, But the more I looked on it, the more I really liked it. And then watching it again with the commentary, I did really enjoy the ending. It was definitely my least favorite ending of the three, but almost might be my favorite film in a way. And repeat viewings would probably... I just really liked the guy who played the father, the director. I really loved the boy who played the son. And I just loved all the interactions, and some of the cinematography was beautiful. And again, seeing these brief moments of visual beauty amidst an era that's been devastated by something really tragic was a nice juxtaposition. And I don't know, I just loved the faces of the people that he encountered, and it was just a nice film. I don't know, I just really enjoyed it. Like it was almost like a nice comfort film in a way, which usually happens when I've watched a film many times, I suppose, and I know it inside and out. But it almost felt like there was an instant familiarity with me in this film, and it just felt like a film that I would have always enjoyed. Even as a teenager, I think I would have really enjoyed this film. Even though I definitely have more patience with films now, it would have really caught my attention, I think, especially if I knew the context of the other two films. But it works on its own as well. And yeah, it's a wonderful film. So there it is. And Life Goes On. That's pretty much my thoughts. I'm trying to think if there's anything else really I could go. Oh, okay, one more thing. I'm glad I didn't forget about this. So at one point, he picks up the old man from the first film in his car, the director. And they're talking about the film, and he drops him off where he lives, and the director gets out, and this is where I still thought there was a fan of the first film, not the director, because he says, "Oh, I expected you would live in the house from the movie," but that doesn't really make sense, because if he was the director, he would know that wasn't really his house, unless the production team put him in that house and the director wasn't aware. So there almost felt like a hole there, I suppose. But he says, "Oh, I expect you to see you in a different house," and I almost did as well, because I thought that maybe all these non-actors in the first movie, they were just filmed where they actually lived, but that wasn't the case, because it was more of a constructed film than is readily visible in the very realistic film and story that it portrays. But you see this old man, and the director says, "Well, I thought you would have lived in that house from the first film," and he's like, "No, that was just for the movie," and he walks over to his real house. And as we get there, he kind of says, as he's walking into the back garden, "Well, this is also a film for the movie as well. This again isn't my real house. This one's just for the movie." And suddenly I thought, "Oh, does he mean this movie, like the one I'm watching? Are we breaking the fourth wall here?" And he's going to, I forget what it was, he's going to pick something up. And he goes up the steps, and he just kind of turns around, and he's like, "What do I do?" or something like that. And you hear Kiarostami off camera saying, "Oh, just go and hand him the thing." And a production assistant walks onto frame, just kind of scuttles in, picks something up, gives it to the old man, and then leaves the frame again, and the scene continues. And I'm like, what the fuck just happened? And I thought, are the walls going to start breaking down? But it never happens again. And it's almost like this kind of like just, I don't know, it was just this weird playful thing. It reminded me of the works of Agnieszka Varda, It's just like, let's see what we can do with the form of a film, and just not fuck around. That was what I was going to say, but play around with it. And I just that line when he's like, "I thought you would have lived in the house in the movies." Like, no, that was just for the film. Well, this house is for the film as well. So even this one isn't my real house. So it's almost like just a wink to the audience in a way. But it was really strange, and I kind of don't want to know what that was all about. I just loved, the way it kind of perked me up, like, what the hell's going on here? And then nothing ever again that like even closely resembled that, which was really interesting. But yeah, so that was just a really strange part of the film I enjoyed, and I think I'll be thinking about for a long time, and will always look forward to that scene when it comes up again when I rewatch the film. So there we go, that's my thoughts on And Life Goes On. In the next video, I will cover the third and final film in the trilogy, which is Through the Olive Trees from 1994. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in that video.
It's alright by me. Apart from the fact he throws cans of Carlin into a tree. Yeah, he's really cool. Yeah, he's really cool. But he's not quite as cool as you, 'cause